Wolseley, Saskatchewan is the kind of town where Saturday night turns into Sunday quietly. The lake lies still, the grain elevators shadow the horizon, and the main street shuts its eyes early. On the night of August 17th, rolling into the early morning of August 18th, 2024, a little bungalow in Wolseley was busy anyway. Friends were in and out, music thumping low, screens lighting up with snapshots and birthday filters. Keelia Windigo had just turned 18, a milestone circled on calendars, a promise she'd carried through high school into a future she was ready to name. She was tiny and bright, quick to laugh, quick to forgive. People in town called her kind without having to reach for bigger words, because kind is already big enough. If you ask the people who knew her to tell you about that evening, they start with ordinary things: balloons taped to a doorway, a cake waiting in the kitchen, a playlist she had tweaked to get the mix right. 18 was supposed to feel like permission, to make plans, to work more hours, to start saving for the things she wanted, and the places she wanted to see. She had family close by and friends who fit together like puzzle pieces. Different shapes, same picture. There's a particular joy to small-town birthdays. You don't need to impress strangers. You just need your people in one place. Sometime after midnight, the party thinned the way parties do. A few friends headed home, others lingered. The house kept its hum. The night held. In a better version of this story, the next moments would be forgettable. A spilled drink wiped up with paper towel, a call from a cousin, a round of late happy birthday texts from people who'd just finished a shift or gotten off the highway. Instead, the night pivoted. Just before dawn, a sound no one expected cut through the walls. A gunshot where there should have been nothing louder than laughter and kitchen noise. The clock would later fix the moment around 4 a.m. It takes time for the mind to match a noise with a meaning. It takes less time for fear to move feet. Calls went out, fast and messy, the kind made when people are trying to turn panic into instructions. Indian Head RCMP began to roll. First responders do two jobs at once on nights like this. They try to pull life back into a body, and they put order around a scene so the truth can land later. Inside that small house, medics worked with the urgency training gives them. Outside, officers began the choreography that reads like ritual. If you don't know how much it matters, tape, perimeter, names, notes, a first sketch of who was here and who wasn't. At the center was Keelia, critically injured. Despite efforts at the scene, she did not survive. The birthday that had started with sparklers and snapshots ended with a declaration of death, on the very day the government says, you become an adult. By the time the sun was up over Wolseley, word had begun to pour through the town, the way water finds every low place. In a place with fewer than 1,000 people, everyone knows someone who knows the family. Messages stacked up without punctuation. Are you home? Is it true? Please answer. The mayor spoke to the press in a voice that kept catching on simple sentences, because some facts refused to sit quietly in the mouth. A young woman has been shot. She was celebrating her 18th. The town is in shock. At the local co-op, the checkout line turned into a small circle of prayer. At the rink, people stood in the parking lot just to be around other people, because grief often arrives as the need to leave the house without knowing where to go. RCMP issued their first updates carefully. There would be time later for lines on a charge sheet and dates for courtrooms. That morning, there was only what could be said without harming the investigation. A male youth, 17, had been taken into custody. A firearm was part of the case. The language stayed narrow because it had to. Manslaughter with a firearm would be among the charges. No name. No speculation. In Canada, the law shields the identities of young accused. And in the first hours after a death that reverberates like this one, that shield is more than a statute. It is a pause button for a town bracing itself against rumor. People still talked, because people always do. But the facts the police would tie down in the days ahead were the only ones that mattered. If you had stood on that street late that morning, you would have seen the ordinary meet the unbearable. Patrol trucks idled beside family cars. A strip of yellow tape cut a neat line across a front yard where birthday pictures had been taken the night before. Neighbors stepped onto porches and then stepped back inside because they didn't trust their faces to stay arranged. Reporters arrived as gently as reporters can. A few doors down, someone put a casserole in an oven, because grief is a full-body experience, and people need to eat even when they can't taste. On social media, tributes for Kelia began to flower. Snapshots from school events, inside jokes typed in the shorthand only close friends can read, notes from cousins who promised to keep certain traditions alive. Her mother wrote simply about a daughter who always saw the good first, who would forgive you before you finished apologizing, who loved big and without calculation. Those are the words that cut deepest, because they describe a kind of goodness that believes it will be met in kind. Communities like Wolseley are built on that faith. The investigation broadened and narrowed at once. Major crimes took carriage. Evidence technicians did the slow, careful work that turns chaos into a set of objects and times. Phones were collected as evidence, then replaced with borrowed devices so people could call who they needed to call. Statements were taken, and then taken again once the first shock turned into recall. Somewhere in that house, a chain of custody began for a weapon that should never have been in a room where candles and plastic cups had been. The questions were the ones you would expect, each of them heavier than they seemed, typed in a line. How did a gun come to be here? How was it handled? Whose hands held it last? And what choices turned a celebration into a scene? For those who loved Kelia, the legal scaffolding did not offer comfort. It offered sequence. Funeral plans began with help from aunties who had done this before for other families for other reasons, and still found a way to make the food taste like care. A vigil was organized on the green. In Wolseley, the green is any place the town shows up. And someone with a quiet voice led the first few minutes because quiet is a kindness at the start. The school sent counselors to the places teenagers actually show up. Coffee shops, the skate spot, park benches with shade, because that is where the stories needed to be told and retold until the telling lost its sting. What they said about Kelia was simple and absolute. She was loved. She was brilliant and bright. She was ours. Grief moves fast in a small town, but court moves deliberately. By Monday morning, the day after the shooting, police language shifted from emergency to procedure. The update was brief and careful. A 17-year-old boy was under arrest. A firearm was part of the case. The initial charge included manslaughter with a firearm along with several gun-related offenses. No name. In Canada, the law protects the identities of youth accused, and that privacy is more than a rule. It's a cooling-off valve for a community that has just been set on fire by shock. Inside kitchens, people spoke in half-sentences that ended with the same fact. Kelia was gone, and she had been shot on the day that should have been her clean start into adulthood. The town did something practical to carry the weight. A family friend set up a fundraiser to cover the costs no one plans for. Funeral arrangements, time off work, gas money for the relatives who needed to travel, food for the steady stream of visitors that follows any loss. Messages poured in. Classmates, aunties, friends from the rink, people who only knew her by the way she smiled from across a room. Her obituary started to take shape. The names she belonged to, the siblings she adored, the elders who held her, the baby brother she had lost before, and the auntie she always kept close in memory. It felt wrong, writing those things so soon, But love didn't ask for permission. It just kept showing up. On Tuesday, the youth made his first appearance in provincial court. It wasn't a dramatic scene. Those almost never are. A lawyer confirmed representation. The Crown outlined the counts: manslaughter with a firearm, pointing a firearm, possessing a loaded or restricted weapon without authorization, possession while prohibited or contrary to an order. One count that tells you about the night, and many that tell you about the law that was supposed to keep a gun far from a room with balloons and cake. The judge remanded him in custody. The next date was set. Everyone left with the same unsatisfying certainty. This would take time. While the file grew page by page, Wolseley began to build scaffolding around its grief. Counselors came not only to the school but to the places where teenagers actually gather. Coffee counters, the bench by the water, that corner of the parking lot where the Bluetooth speaker always seems to end up. They weren't there to interrogate anyone. They were there to keep kids from trying to carry something this heavy with only each other to lean on. At night, a circle formed on the green. Candles, grandmothers in folding chairs, cousins with arms around each other, friends who didn't say much because sometimes presence is the only sentence you can get through without breaking. The RCMP worked in 2 lanes at once: quiet forensic routine in the house and public calm outside it. Technicians measured and photographed. A chain of custody tag followed the weapon out of the room and into an evidence locker. Detectives collected phones, logged interviews, printed and pinned text threads that might explain the rhythm of the night. Who arrived when? Who left? What words were exchanged before the sound that ended everything? The goal wasn't to feed rumor. It was to turn a chaotic few hours into a timeline that would still make sense under cross-examination months later. In the days after that first hearing, the case started to move along the rural circuit it would follow for months. Adjourned in one courthouse, remanded to another date. Calendar notes scribbled in the margins of lives that still had to be lived. Reporters summarized the same core facts each time: what had happened, how young she was, how the accused remained in custody, how this wasn't finished. For the family, those notices landed like small earthquakes. Each court date is a reminder that the clock now runs on someone else's schedule. Through it all, the way people described Kalia didn't change. They reached for the same words and never sounded like they were repeating themselves. Kind, bright, forgiving in a way that made you want to be better because you didn't want to disappoint her. She made rooms warmer. She made plans. She picked up extra shifts and talked about saving for a trip because it helps to aim your hope at a map. Her mother wrote about a daughter who only saw the good in people and who would forgive you before you'd finished apologizing. Friends added their own details: the way she hugged, the way she checked in, the way she made birthdays feel bigger, even when they were small. As the week turned, other hard questions hovered. How did a gun end up in that room? Who brought it? Why was it loaded? Why was any of this allowed to be possible? The formal answers would live in charge wording and courtroom submissions. Informally, the town did what towns do when they don't want to wait for a system to speak. It set expectations aloud, lock things up, keep hands off what can end a life in a second, tell the truth about who's got what. Adults said this to other adults with more urgency than before, not as blame, but as a new baseline. Teenagers said it to each other in shorter words that hit harder. Don't mess around. Say something. Leave if you have to. At the vigil, a drum group sang while the light fell. People took turns reading short statements because short is what you can finish when your voice shakes. A cousin thanked the town for the way it had responded: rides, meals, messages, money given quietly without the need for public credit. The mayor spoke softly about a community learning to protect its young in more intentional ways. And then someone started the candles moving from hand to hand so the circle could grow brighter without anyone having to step forward if they didn't want to. It wasn't a show of strength. It was a practice of care. The legal process did not try to borrow their language. It kept to its script. Disclosure between Crown and defense. Discussions about expert reports. The slow assembly of a package that would one day be handed to a judge to explain that single line everyone already knew. An 18-year-old was shot and killed. In the only way the system knows how. Exhibits, statements, certified records, and a story told in measured tones. The court isn't allowed to heal. The most it can do is get the facts right and assign responsibility where it belongs. By the end of that first week, Wolseley had learned how to move through the day without pretending it was normal. People drove by the house slower than usual. The tape was still there. It would come down eventually, but no one was in a hurry to erase the boundary that told passers-by the truth of what the place had become. Inside living rooms, plans were made with care. Who would stay with whom? Who would carry the next day's tasks? Who would sit beside the mother when another official letter arrived and needed reading? "We've got you," became a schedule. The first week gave Wolseley a shape to hold on to. What happened? Who was gone? That a youth was in custody. After that, the story moved on to two tracks that almost never run at the same speed: court calendars and community candles. On the calendar track, the file settled into its circuit. Police reports to Crown prosecutors. Disclosure packages prepared for defense. The next appearance penciled in, and then, when it arrived, pushed to another date because something else had to be done first. Rural justice in Saskatchewan is a rhythm, Regina or Indian Head at first. And then the matter lives most often in Fort Q Appel Provincial Court, where the docket is a quilt of traffic, assaults, break and enters, and, now, a homicide heard in the language of manslaughter with a firearm. Each appearance was short. Defense confirmed they'd received the next disclosure bundle. The Crown reminded the judge the accused remained detained. A new date was set. Court ended. The town exhaled and circled the next square on the calendar. Those adjournments bled into winter, then spring. By early 2025, people who'd never before opened a court news page could recite the phrasing from memory. A 17-year-old boy, unnamed because the law says youth identities are shielded, remains in custody, charged with manslaughter and a stack of firearms counts that described how the law expected guns to be stored, licensed, and never pointed. The headlines changed only by adding new months. That sameness was both mercy and weight. Mercy, because a case moving without wild surprises meant the family could plan their days without fear of sudden turns. Weight, because each small court mention reopened the ache of what started it all. Behind those one-paragraph updates, the investigation kept doing the slow work the public never sees. Interviewing again once shock had burned off enough for memory to settle. Translating screenshots and group chats into timelines that can survive cross-examination. Photographing the room in ways that let a judge understand scale. How far a sofa is from a doorway. How long it takes to step from kitchen tile onto carpet. How a person could or could not reach something without moving. A firearm that had no place in a birthday room had been seized. Chain of custody paperwork followed it everywhere. Forensic reports arrived in careful prose that uses the word consistent more than any other, because science does not guess. It narrows. On the candle track, Wolseley learned to grieve without turning grief into a show. The vigil on the green became something quieter, a series of unannounced evenings when a few people would meet, light a handful of candles and sit. There were no speeches. There were hugs, and sometimes laughter. The kind that's lighter than you expect, because remembering joy is allowed, even when the reason you're gathered is monstrous. A banner with Kelia's name was signed in different inks by kids and aunties and elders. It wasn't left up forever. It came out for the hardest nights, then went away again so the town didn't feel like it was living inside a headline. Her mother became the center of a practical circle. People made a roster of the tasks that collapse under grief. Forms to fill, appointments to make or cancel, groceries, even when you have no appetite, rides to court, company after court, and on bad days, company instead of court. A cousin took over the job of answering messages, so the family didn't have to keep typing the same small updates to 100 people who loved them. Meals still came. Money from the fundraiser paid bills quietly. Flowers kept arriving even after the first rush, on random Tuesdays, because the second month and the sixth need as much care as the first week. The obituary had said what the town kept repeating like a prayer: kind, bright, forgiving. The sort of forgiving that happens in real time, not after long debates with yourself. People started calling this the Kelia way, and tried clumsily at first to practice it. Kids checked on each other more. Parents repeated themselves less and listened more. Teachers let a deadline slide when they could tell a student wasn't really in the room and then quietly found a way to help them catch up. The rink paused for a moment of silence before a game, and then the kids skated hard because it felt good to do something physical that wasn't crying. By late summer 2025, the court notes were still brief, but they had the look of a file that wasn't going to vanish. The youth charged in connection with an August 2024 death in Wolseley appeared. Matters adjourned again. Remanded in custody. Next date set. That drumbeat is how serious cases travel. No drama, just the steady assembly of a record. Reporters wrote the updates kindly, keeping Kelia's name in the first line, reminding readers that a birthday should have remained a birthday. The mayor, when asked, kept saying the same thing because it was still true. The town was holding together, and the family still needed the boring kinds of help: rides, meals, patience. Dominating every conversation was the same set of questions that had arrived on day one. How did a gun get into that room? Why was it loaded? Why was it pointed at all? The formal answers live in the charge wording and will eventually live in sentencing submissions if the case reaches that stage. Informally, Wolseley stopped shrugging at gun talk. Locking up firearms became a sentence spoken out loud in houses where it was once just assumed. Adults asked other adults harder questions. Do you have a safe? Is it locked? Who knows the code, without worrying about sounding nosy? Teenagers began treating "show me" and "let me hold it" as red flags instead of thrills, a quiet recalibration that might be the most meaningful change of all. A few stories bubbled up and were put away again because they belonged to the investigation. Who was in the house at what time? Whether someone thought the gun was empty? Whether words like accident were spoken in the confusion after the shot? The only version that mattered in public was the one the family insisted on keeping at the center. An 18-year-old was shot and killed at her own birthday. The rest would be said where it belongs, in a courtroom where words are taken down by a person wearing headphones who only cares that every syllable is exact. In the meantime, her friends built traditions like scaffolding. On her birthday, they posted the same selfie again. Not for likes, but as a way to time travel for a minute to the version of the world where she was texting back. They left small gifts at the edge of the water. Beads, a bracelet, a folded note with her name written 3 times. They used the money from the fund to launch something that felt like her. A small bursary in her name for a classmate, heading to a program that fit the way she loved. Early childhood, healthcare aid, anything service-shaped. It wasn't big, it was exact. Grief is a full-time job, and the town is a large staff. Someone shoveled the walk when snow came early. Someone else remembered what time the dog likes dinner. A neighbor kept an eye on the porch so cards and deliveries didn't sit in the wind. It sounds small, listed like that, but it's how people survive the months between crimes and trials. The Keelia way became a kind of checklist. Be kind first. Forgive quickly when you can. Show up without needing to be seen. And keep choosing the boring good thing over the dramatic one. As summer turned, the matter appeared on the docket again. And again the note was almost the same. Adjourned, remanded, next date. People who'd never used words like disclosure or remand now used them with the fluency of experience they never asked for. Some days the sameness felt like moving nowhere. Other days it felt like progress, because sameness in court means there's no crisis, just work being done. By autumn, Wolseley knew what it felt like to live inside a calendar. Court dates arrived like weather fronts, expected, short, and never as informative as people hoped. Each one brought the same rhythm. A drive to Fort Qu'Appelle, a hallway echoing with shoes and weekend talk from other cases. A few minutes before a judge. Words that were now familiar to people who had never stepped into a courthouse before. Remanded, adjourned, disclosure. Then the slow walk back to the car, where someone always said what everybody was thinking anyway. It shouldn't take this long. And then the answer everyone had agreed to live with, because they could not change it. It takes however long it takes to get it right. Court stories were short enough to fit in a text. The youth stayed in custody. Lawyers needed more time for reports, for reviewing new police files, for working through the stack of firearms counts that came with the main charge of manslaughter with a firearm. Later in the year, another appearance shifted the next date deeper into fall. Nothing dramatic happened in open court, which is exactly how serious cases move when they are being built with care. Even the updates in the news sounded steady, almost metronomic. A new date set. Remanded again. The matter returns at the end of the month. People clipped those lines and pinned them to the fridge not because they said much, but because they needed a clean square to aim their worry at. Behind those quiet minutes, the file thickened. Forensic reports landed in careful, unhurried language. Analysts finished their diagrams of the room and their timelines of the night. Officers circled back for second interviews, not to badger anyone, but because memory hardens after shock and sometimes the small details. Who was in the kitchen and who was near the hallway? What song was playing? Whether anyone saw the gun before the shot. Only push through once the first storm has passed. Each new line in a report was a hinge that might or might not carry weight later. The Crown and Defense traded hard drives and signatures, and the granular paperwork that turns a tragedy into a case that will not fall apart the first time a difficult question is asked. In homes around town, the grief work became quieter and more complicated. The early casseroles had long since been eaten or frozen. The vigils had softened into smaller circles. But the practical kindness did not stop. Someone made a schedule for the dull tasks that fall apart when your heart stays heavy. Garbage day, appointments, rides for paperwork, and bank errands that cannot be done online. Friends learned the skill of being present without a program. Sit. Bring coffee. Say her name out loud. Talk about anything at all, if today is not a day for the hard story. But keep the hard story so close, it can be reached without shame when the hand goes out. Out of that routine, Wolseley built something with a name. People started calling it the Keelia way, and it was less a slogan than a habit. Be kind first, even when you're tired. Forgive quickly when you can, so the hurt doesn't get to stay in the room and grow. Show up before you are asked. Choose the boring good thing over the dramatic one. Teenagers invented rituals to keep the name warm. A little wrist ribbon, a photo in a wallet, a lock screen reminder on dates that were now too sharp to be ignored. On her next birthday, the same selfie appeared again in half the town's stories. Not for likes, but because reposting a picture is a way of standing still for a minute in the last version of the world, where she was still answering her phone. The question that had chased the town since August did not go anywhere. How did a gun get into a birthday room, and why was it in anyone's hands at all? By now, the formal answers lived inside the charge sheet and would one day be said aloud in court with evidence attached. Informally, people stopped treating gun safety as a quiet topic. Adults asked each other blunt questions without apology. Is your safe locked? Who has the code? Where are the keys? Teens learned to treat show me and let me hold it as red flags, not thrills. The shift was small and cultural, but it had weight. A party where someone flashes a weapon is not a party. It is a room to leave. As fall turned toward winter, the youth justice reality settled in. Because the accused was under 18 at the time, the law kept his name sealed and the door open to a youth sentence, unless a judge eventually decided to lift that bar. Parents and aunties asked what that could mean. Lawyers explained the range, without pretending it was simple. Manslaughter with a firearm is a serious offense. In youth court, even serious offenses come with a different philosophy. Rehabilitation if it is possible, protection if it is necessary, and a sentence that plays both roles. If the Crown ever asked to move the matter into adult sentencing, a judge would have to hear arguments about maturity, history, risk, and the purpose of penalty. None of that was decided in the fall. But the talk had to be had so the family knew what roads the case could travel. The town kept teaching safety to the youngest kids in ways that did not scare them away from their own lives. Tell us where you are going and who you are with. Tell us when you change plans. If a room stops feeling like a room, leave. No speech, no drama, just go. If you see something that could end a life, do not treat it like a toy or a trophy. Call an adult who will listen first and lecture later. The school put those ideas in plain language. Coaches used the first 5 minutes of practice to repeat them. The rules read like care, not control, and after a while they felt as normal as a warm-up stretch. When another quick court appearance nudged the next date into late October, no one was surprised. The family still went, because showing up is its own form of love. But the expedition felt different now. They knew exactly where to sit. They knew which machine makes the hallway coffee that does not taste like cardboard. They knew which clerks would give them a small smile at the right moment, and which ones would keep it strictly formal, because that is how they manage their own feelings in a building full of hard stories. They closed their eyes during the few lines in which a file number and a charge are read aloud, not because they could not bear to hear it again, but because sometimes closing your eyes is how you tell your body the words are not going to knock you over this time. In the background, the fund in Kelia's name did something that fit her. It paid for bus passes, exam fees, and work boots for kids who needed a hand getting started. It covered gas for aunties doing hospital runs in hotel rooms when families needed to be close by for treatment. Nothing grand, all exact. People who donated did not expect to be thanked publicly. They recognized their own town in the balance sheet, a list of small expenses that add up to a kinder year for someone else. When snow came early, the porch was swept clear, so flowers and deliveries did not ice to the boards. At the rink, the team skated in silence for a minute, and then the whistle blew, and the kids played fast because that is one of the ways the body survives. At the lake, a little drift of offerings formed and reformed. Beads, a bracelet, folded notes whose ink ran because nothing can stay dry forever in Saskatchewan fall. The notes all had the same name. She was ours. She is ours. The tense did what tenses do in grief and refused to settle down. By the end of the year, the town had learned the art of the second wind. Grief is a long marathon. You cannot sprint all the way through. People took turns carrying the family through the hard days. A cousin handled calls one week, a friend the next. Meals rotated back into the routine without ceremony. Someone who had never baked before learned how to make the one cake she used to pick, because that felt like a right kind of progress. Most of the help was quiet, because quiet is how respect sounds when the microphones have gone home. There's a moment in every long case when a town decides it won't wait for a verdict to choose who it is. Wolseley reached that moment quietly. The court dates kept moving like weather. Another adjournment, another remand, another square to circle on a page. But in kitchens and school hallways, at the rink and down by the water, people began to practice a simple discipline. Keep Kelia at the center. Keeping her there starts with telling the right stories. Not the ones about sirens and tape, but the ones that make rooms warmer. The way she texted first, not waiting for you to be brave. The way she forgave in real time and made you want to be worthy of it. The way she planned. Work shifts, savings goals, a little trip she'd been daydreaming about. And how even the planning felt like an offering. Friends talk about her hugs, and the one joke she couldn't finish because she was laughing too much before the punchline. Aunties talk about the way she helped without being asked. Those details aren't extra. They're the point. If the town must carry a headline, it will carry her name in front of it. The second part of keeping her at the center is a set of habits that look small on paper and change everything in practice. People started calling it the Kelia way. Be kind first, even when you're tired or hurt, even when the day took more from you than it gave. Forgive quickly when you can, so the hurt doesn't get to set up house. Show up before you are asked, and keep showing up after the first month when the casseroles have thinned. Choose the boring good thing over the dramatic one. The ride home, the check-in text, the quiet errand, the late-night call that keeps someone from being alone with something heavy. At school, that became a kind of curriculum. The words boundary, consent, pressure, and safety were taught as skills, not slogans. How to say no without apology, how to hear no without negotiation, how to leave a room that stops feeling like a room. Kids practiced what to do if they see something that could end a life. Don't touch, don't pose, don't pass it around. Tell the adult who will listen first and lecture later. Coaches took 5 minutes at the start of practice to repeat the basics. Share your plan, answer your phone, change the plan if your gut says so, and we'll pick you up, no questions asked. At home, adults asked each other plainer questions about the things that matter. Is your safe locked? Who has the code? Where are the keys? When kids are over, do you check again? People learned not to be shy about care. It isn't nosy to ask how danger is being kept out of a room. It's love with good manners. Teenagers, too, adjusted their instincts. Where once "show me" and "let me hold it" felt like a thrill, they became the sign to walk away. A party where someone flashes a weapon is not a party. It's a room to leave. The court's steady drumbeat went on in the background. There were more short appearances, more quiet notes. The youth accused remained in custody. Lawyers were still exchanging disclosure. The file moved through the circuit toward the day the facts would be spoken under oath. People asked what sentences can look like for someone who is under 18. The answers aren't poetry, they're policy. The youth system in this country is built to balance accountability with the chance to change. For a serious offense with a firearm, consequences are serious. Sometimes the Crown asks a judge to consider adult sentencing. Sometimes the court keeps it within youth law, which still allows for long, structured supervision. Those choices belong to the courtroom, not the sidewalk. The family's job, the town's job, is to keep breathing, while the system does its work and to keep refusing the lie that justice is the only kind of care that counts. Grief doesn't obey calendars, but calendars help. Birthdays, holidays, exam weeks, the first snow, those days hit like waves. The people around Kelia learned to plan on purpose. They booked a breakfast table on sharp days so no one woke up to silence. They kept a spare chair at gatherings so someone could join late or leave early without a speech. They posted the same selfie on her birthday not for likes, but as a way to visit, for one small minute, the last version of the world where she was still answering her phone. A little bursary in her name paid for exactly the kind of starts she would have cheered. Exam fees, work boots, a bus pass, nothing grand, all exact. The green where people first gathered became something gentler. Not a shrine, not a stage, just a place where, on some evenings, a few candles appear, and the air feels like a hand on your shoulder. The banner with her name comes out when it should and goes away when it needs to, because memory matters most when it makes room to breathe. Down by the water, offerings collect and dissolve. Beads, a bracelet, a folded note that says her name 3 times. The ink runs, but that's all right. Love isn't ruined by weather. If you ask what this year has taught most clearly, the answers come back in short sentences. Check on your people. Tell the truth quickly. Keep dangerous things out of reach and out of rooms that should only ever hold cake and candles. Don't let curiosity dress up as compassion. Say her name first. And when the doorbell rings with another meal, remember that care is a team sport. You take a turn, you rest. You let someone else take a turn. One day the courtroom will finish its long conversation. A judge will say the facts in a voice that does not shake. The law will measure what it can measure. When that day comes, it will matter. But it won't be the end of the story. The end of the story is the same as the beginning. A town choosing to look like the girl it lost. A family carried by 100 ordinary kindnesses. Young people taught how to keep a room safe and a friendship honest. A name kept warm. So this is how we close, not with a door, but with an open room. If you loved her, love louder. If you didn't know her, learn her way. Keep the ordinary strong. Share your route. Answer the text. Leave the room that turns. Ask the blunt question that keeps a friend alive. And when you're not sure what else to do the simplest thing of all. Say her name out loud, and let the best parts of your day be a way of carrying her forward. Keep her at the center. Keep going. If you want true cases told with care, and the victim at the center, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Comment for Kelia to honor her, and share this episode responsibly. Your support helps us keep making thoughtful, respectful storytelling.